I was finishing my morning coffee when I heard the scratching at my front door. Living alone on this remote farm for 15 years, I'd grown accustomed to various wildlife visitors, raccoons, possums, even the occasional deer. But nothing had prepared me for what I found when I opened that door. A red fox stood on my porch, her amber eyes locked onto mine with an intensity that made my breath catch. She wasn't running, wasn't showing any of the typical fear responses I'd expect from a wild animal. Instead, she seemed to be waiting, as if she had an appointment she was determined to keep. Behind her, partially hidden in the shadows of my porch swing, lay a small bundle of russet fur. Her cub, I realized, and something was terribly wrong. The little one wasn't moving with the quick, darting energy typical of young foxes. It lay still, too still, breathing in shallow, labored gasps. The mother fox took a step back, never breaking eye contact, then looked pointedly at her cub. She repeated this motion 3 times, and I felt a chill run down my spine. This wasn't random animal behavior. This was communication, deliberate and desperate. She was asking for help. I'd heard stories from other farmers about animals seeking human assistance, but I'd always dismissed them as folklore. Yet here I was, face to face with a mother who had somehow decided that I, of all people, might be her cub's only chance at survival. The morning sun cast long shadows across my porch as I stood frozen, trying to process what was happening. This fox had made a choice that went against every instinct her species possessed. She had brought her most precious possession to a human, trusting in something beyond her wild nature. The mother fox circled her cub once, then sat down directly in front of my door, blocking my path. Her message was clear. She wasn't leaving without help. I knelt down slowly, keeping my movements deliberate and calm. The cub's breathing was definitely labored, and I could see a dark stain on its left hind leg. "Easy, Mama," I whispered, though I wasn't sure if I was trying to calm her or myself. She tilted her head at the sound of my voice, and for a moment, I swear I saw something almost human in her expression. Recognition, perhaps, or maybe just the universal language of a mother's desperation. She had somehow identified me as someone who might help rather than harm. I'd always been good with animals. Growing up on this farm, I'd helped birth calves, mended broken wings, and nursed countless creatures back to health. But those were domestic animals, or wildlife that had been brought to me by neighbors. This was different. This was a wild animal making a conscious choice to trust a human. The cub stirred slightly, letting out a weak whimper that seemed to pierce straight through my chest. The mother fox immediately moved closer to her baby, nuzzling it gently before looking back at me with those piercing amber eyes. I realized she wasn't just asking for help. She was asking me to do something that went against the natural order. She wanted me to touch her cub, to intervene in a way that could mean the difference between life and death. The weight of that trust settled on my shoulders like a heavy blanket. The morning was growing warmer, but I felt cold with the responsibility she was placing on me. Moving slower than I'd ever moved in my life, I extended my hand toward the injured cub. The mother fox tensed but didn't retreat. Her eyes never left my face, reading my intentions with an accuracy that unnerved me. One wrong move, one gesture she interpreted as threatening, and this fragile trust would shatter. The cub was warm to the touch, its tiny heart beating rapidly against my palm. The injury on its leg was worse than I'd initially thought. A deep gash that looked like it could have come from barbed wire or perhaps a larger predator. The wound was clean but deep, and without treatment, infection was inevitable. "This is going to need stitches," I said softly, more to myself than to the fox. But she seemed to understand the gravity in my tone. I'd stitched up plenty of farm animals over the years, but never a wild fox cub, and certainly never with its mother watching my every move. The mother fox had positioned herself where she could see both her cub and my face. Her body coiled like a spring, ready to act if she perceived any threat. The cub's eyes fluttered open briefly, revealing the same amber color as its mother's, before closing again. It was weak from blood loss and probably shock. Time was not on our side. I looked at the mother fox, trying to communicate my intentions. "I need to take him inside," I said, gesturing toward my house. "I have supplies that can help." She seemed to consider this, her head tilting as she processed my words and movements. Then, in a gesture that still gives me chills, she picked up her cub gently in her mouth and took a step toward my front door. She was giving me permission to help, trusting me with the most precious thing in her world. I opened the door wider, and the mother fox carried her cub across the threshold into my home. She paused in the entryway, her wild senses overwhelmed by the unfamiliar scents and sounds of human habitation. Her ears swiveled constantly, cataloging every creak of the old farmhouse, every tick of the grandfather clock in the hallway. I led them to my kitchen, where the morning light was best and I kept my veterinary supplies. The mother fox placed her cub gently on the clean towel I spread across my kitchen table, then backed away just enough to give me room to work while maintaining her vigilant watch. The cub was barely conscious, which was probably a blessing given what I needed to do. I gathered my supplies, antiseptic, sutures, gauze, and a small dose of antibiotics I kept for the farm animals. My hands were steadier than I expected, muscle memory taking over from years of treating injured livestock. "This might hurt him a little," I warned the mother fox, though I doubted she understood my words. But she seemed to understand my tone, and when I began cleaning the wound, she moved closer to her cub's head, offering comfort with gentle licks and soft whimpers. The gash was deep but clean, and as I worked, I found myself talking softly to both of them. "You're being so brave," I told the cub. "And you," I glanced at the mother fox, "you're an incredible mother." She watched every stitch, every movement of my hands, her trust both humbling and terrifying. I'd never felt such responsibility for another creature's faith in me. This wild animal had brought her dying cub to my door, somehow knowing I would help rather than harm. The kitchen filled with an odd sense of peace despite the gravity of the situation. As I worked on the final stitches, something remarkable happened. The mother fox moved closer to me, close enough that I could feel the warmth of her body against my arm. She wasn't just tolerating my presence anymore. She was actively seeking comfort from it. The cub stirred as I finished the last suture, letting out a stronger cry than before. His mother immediately responded, nuzzling him gently while keeping one eye on me. I applied antibiotic ointment and wrapped the wound in clean gauze, my movements careful and deliberate. "He's going to need to stay quiet for a few days," I explained, knowing she couldn't understand my words but hoping my tone conveyed the message. "The stitches need time to heal." I prepared a small dose of liquid antibiotic, diluted and measured for the cub's size. This would be the real test of trust. I would need to hold the cub while administering the medicine, and every instinct the mother fox possessed would be screaming at her to protect her young from a potential predator. I showed her the syringe, letting her sniff it, then demonstrated on my own finger how I would place it in the cub's mouth. She watched intently, and when I reached for her baby, she stepped aside. The cub took the medicine without much fuss, and I could see some color returning to his tiny face. His breathing was already less labored, and his eyes seemed brighter. The immediate crisis had passed, but recovery would take time. I looked at the mother fox, wondering what would happen next. Would she take her cub and disappear back into the wild? Or had something fundamental changed in this kitchen, something that would alter both our lives forever? I expected the mother fox to take her cub and leave once the immediate medical crisis had passed. Instead, she settled down beside the kitchen table, her body positioned so she could watch both her baby and the exits. She was staying, at least for now. I prepared a small bed from old blankets in a quiet corner of the kitchen, away from the main traffic areas but still within sight of where I worked. The mother fox inspected my makeshift nest thoroughly before gently moving her cub there, arranging him with the careful precision only a mother could manage. The afternoon passed quietly. I went about my usual farm chores, but I found myself checking on my unexpected guests every few minutes. The mother fox dozed fitfully, never fully relaxing, one ear always alert for danger. The cub slept more peacefully, his small body finally able to rest without the constant pain. By evening, I faced a dilemma. The cub needed consistent care for the next few days. Regular antibiotic doses, wound cleaning, and monitoring for infection. But keeping wild animals, even temporarily, went against everything I'd been taught about wildlife management. As if sensing my internal struggle, the mother fox approached me as I prepared their evening meal, a mixture of the raw chicken I kept for my farm cats and some cooked rice. She sat directly in front of me, those amber eyes holding mine with an intensity that made my decision for me. She wasn't asking for permanent sanctuary. She was asking for time. Time for her cub to heal, time to regain strength, time to prepare for their return to the wild. It was a temporary partnership born of necessity and sealed with trust. I nodded at her, feeling slightly foolish for having a conversation with a fox, but somehow knowing she understood. The next morning brought a new dynamic to my usually solitary routine. The mother fox had claimed the corner of my kitchen as her temporary territory, and she watched my every movement with the intensity of a security guard. She'd learned my patterns quickly, when I made coffee, when I prepared meals, when I moved toward the medical supplies. The cub was noticeably stronger, lifting his head when I approached and even attempting to stand on his good legs. His appetite had returned, and he eagerly accepted the small portions of food I offered. The mother fox ate cautiously, never taking her eyes off me, but she was eating, which was a good sign. I established a routine for wound care, approaching slowly and talking softly before each treatment. The mother fox had learned to recognize these moments and would position herself where she could comfort her cub while allowing me to work. Her trust was growing, but it remained conditional and carefully measured. During the quiet afternoon hours, I found myself observing their interactions with fascination. The mother fox was incredibly attentive, constantly grooming her cub, adjusting his position for comfort, and responding to his smallest sounds. Her devotion was absolute and unwavering. I began talking to them more freely, sharing stories of the farm, the weather, my thoughts about their recovery. The mother fox seemed to find my voice soothing, and I noticed she relaxed more when I spoke in calm, measured tones. By the third day, something had shifted. The mother fox no longer startled when I entered the kitchen. She'd begun to anticipate my routines, moving out of the way when I needed to access supplies, returning to her position when I was finished. We were learning to coexist, to share space in a way that respected both our natures. By the fourth day, the cub was attempting to walk. His steps were unsteady and clearly painful, but the determination in his small face reminded me so much of his mother's fierce resolve. She encouraged his efforts while remaining close enough to catch him if he fell. I changed the bandages twice daily now, and the wound was healing beautifully. No signs of infection, clean edges, and healthy tissue growth. The cub had even begun to play a little, batting at his mother's tail and pouncing on the corner of his blanket with typical fox kit energy. The mother fox had grown comfortable enough to leave her cub for short periods, exploring my kitchen and the adjacent mudroom. She was always careful, always alert, but her movements had lost some of their initial tension. She'd even begun to show curiosity about my daily activities, watching me prepare meals and tend to household tasks. I found myself looking forward to these quiet moments with my unusual house guests. The mother fox had a personality that was becoming more apparent each day. Intelligent, cautious, but with moments of what I could only describe as playfulness. She'd discovered that the kitchen faucet dripped occasionally, and she'd taken to catching the drops with her tongue, a behavior that never failed to make me smile. The cub's recovery was progressing faster than I'd hoped. His appetite was excellent, his energy was returning, and he was beginning to show interest in the world beyond his blanket nest. I knew that soon they would be ready to return to their wild life. The thought filled me with both pride and an unexpected sadness. I'd grown attached to these temporary residents, and the kitchen would feel empty without their presence. On the sixth day, I decided it was time to test the cub's mobility. I opened the kitchen door to my enclosed back porch, creating a safe space where he could practice walking on different surfaces. The mother fox inspected the area thoroughly before allowing her cub to venture beyond his blanket. The cub's first steps onto the porch were tentative, but his excitement was obvious. He sniffed everything: the wooden boards, the old rocking chair, the potted plants I kept there. His mother followed closely, ready to intervene if he overexerted himself. I watched from the doorway as the cub discovered a patch of sunlight streaming through the porch windows. He settled into it with a contented sigh that was purely fox, wild and free despite his temporary domestication. His mother joined him, and for a moment, they looked like any family enjoying a peaceful afternoon. But I noticed how the mother fox's ears constantly swiveled toward the sounds of the outside world. Birds calling, wind in the trees, the distant sounds of my neighbor's cattle. She was remembering her wild life, preparing for their return to it. The cub tried to jump onto the rocking chair and failed, tumbling gently onto his side. Instead of crying, he immediately tried again, his determination both admirable and heartbreaking. He was healing, growing stronger, but he was still just a baby learning to navigate the world. His mother helped him onto the chair, then settled beside him, both of them gazing out at the farm beyond the porch. I realized they were saying goodbye to this safe haven, preparing themselves for the challenges that awaited them in the wild. The transition back to their natural life had begun. The mother fox began using our porch time as teaching opportunities for her cub. She would demonstrate hunting behaviors, pouncing on leaves that blew across the wooden boards, showing him how to stalk and strike. The cub watched intently, then attempted to mimic her movements with varying degrees of success. I found myself learning as much as the cub. I watched how she communicated through body language, ear positions, and subtle vocalizations. She had an entire vocabulary of sounds, soft chirps for encouragement, sharp barks for warnings, and gentle whimpers for comfort. The cub was learning this language, responding appropriately to each signal. During one afternoon session, a wild rabbit appeared at the edge of my property. The mother fox immediately went into hunting mode, every muscle tense, her focus laser sharp. The cub tried to copy her posture, and while his form was imperfect, his instincts were clearly intact. The rabbit disappeared into the brush, and the mother fox relaxed, but the lesson continued. She began teaching her cub about different scents, leading him around the porch to investigate various smells. She showed him which ones meant danger and which ones meant opportunity. I realized I was witnessing something extraordinary, a master class in survival taught by one of nature's most skilled teachers. The mother fox was preparing her cub for independence, giving him the tools he would need to thrive in the wild. But she was also preparing herself. Each lesson was a step toward letting go, toward trusting that she had taught him well enough to survive on his own. The bond between them was strong, but she understood that true love sometimes meant teaching your child to live without you. On the 8th day, everything changed. I woke to find the mother fox standing at the kitchen door, not the porch door, but the one that led outside. Her posture was different, alert, eager, ready. She looked at me, then at her cub, then back at the door. The message was clear. It was time. The cub was strong enough now to walk without limping, though I could tell the leg was still tender. His energy had returned completely, and he'd been growing restless in our confined space. He needed room to run, to explore, to be a wild fox. I prepared one final meal for them, adding extra nutrients and calories they would need for their journey back to their territory. The mother fox ate with more enthusiasm than she'd shown since arriving, as if she too was preparing for the challenges ahead. As I removed the cub's bandages for the last time, I marveled at how well the wound had healed. The stitches had dissolved naturally, leaving only a thin scar that would fade with time. He would carry this mark forever, a reminder of his brush with death and the unlikely alliance that had saved him. The mother fox watched me examine her cub one final time, and I swear I saw gratitude in her eyes. She had trusted me with her most precious possession, and I had proven worthy of that trust. The cub was alive, healthy, and ready to return to his wild life. I opened the kitchen door and stepped aside. The mother fox looked at me for a long moment, then gently nudged her cub toward the opening. They paused at the threshold, caught between two worlds, the safety of my kitchen and the freedom of the wild. The mother fox stepped outside first, testing the air, scanning for threats. Satisfied that the immediate area was safe, she called softly to her cub. He followed her onto the porch, then down the steps into my yard. For a moment they both stood still, overwhelmed by the vastness of the outside world after days in confined spaces. I watched from my doorway as the cub took his first tentative steps on natural ground. His movements were careful but confident, and I could see his excitement growing as he rediscovered the world beyond my kitchen. He sniffed everything: grass, flowers, the base of my old oak tree. The mother fox stayed close to him, but I could see her own excitement building. Her ears were pricked forward, catching sounds I couldn't hear, her nose working to identify scents that spoke of home territory and familiar hunting grounds. They moved slowly across my yard, the cub gaining confidence with each step. When they reached the edge of my property, where the mowed grass gave way to wild meadow, they both paused and looked back at me. The mother fox held my gaze for a long moment, and I felt a communication pass between us that transcended species. It was gratitude, certainly, but also something deeper, a recognition of the bond we had forged, the trust we had shared, and the successful partnership that had saved her cub's life. The cub, following his mother's lead, also looked back at me. In his young eyes, I saw curiosity and perhaps a dim memory of safety and healing. He would grow up wild and free, but somewhere in his fox memory, he would carry the knowledge that not all humans were threats. Then they turned and disappeared into the tall grass, two russet forms melting back into the natural world where they belonged. The kitchen felt impossibly empty without my fox family. I found myself listening for the soft sounds of their presence, the cub's contented sighs, the mother's gentle movements, the quiet conversations in their fox language that had become the soundtrack to my days. I cleaned up their makeshift nest, washing the blankets and putting away the medical supplies. The routine tasks felt hollow, mechanical, lacking the purpose they'd held when lives depended on them. I'd grown accustomed to having someone to care for, someone who needed me. My regular farm chores resumed their normal rhythm, but I caught myself pausing frequently to scan the tree line, hoping for a glimpse of russet fur. I knew they were out there somewhere, reclaiming their territory, readjusting to wildlife, but the rational knowledge didn't ease the sense of loss I felt. Days passed without any sign of them. I told myself this was good. It meant they were successfully reintegrating into their natural habitat. Wild animals that lingered around human habitation were often animals in trouble. Their absence was proof of their health and independence. But I missed them. I missed the sense of purpose their presence had given me, the daily routine of care and healing, the quiet companionship of creatures who had chosen to trust me. My coffee tasted different in the empty kitchen, and my evening meals felt solitary in a way they hadn't before. I began to understand something about the nature of temporary relationships, how they could be both brief and profound, how they could change you even as they ended. The mother fox and her cub had been in my life for just over a week, but they had left an indelible mark on my heart. 3 weeks after they'd disappeared into the meadow, I was working in my garden when I heard a familiar sound, a soft bark that made my heart skip. I looked up to see the mother fox standing at the edge of my property, but she wasn't alone. Beside her stood her cub, now noticeably larger and stronger, and 2 other young foxes I hadn't seen before. She had brought her entire family to meet me. The cub I'd helped heal was clearly thriving. His coat was thick and glossy, his movements confident and strong. The scar on his leg was barely visible beneath his fur, just a thin line that told the story of his survival. He looked at me with recognition, and I swear I saw something like affection in his young eyes. The mother fox approached closer than the others, stopping just at the boundary between wild and domestic space. She sat down and looked at me with those amber eyes that had first captured my attention weeks ago. We regarded each other in comfortable silence, 2 beings who had shared an extraordinary experience. After a few minutes, she stood and called softly to her family. They began to move away, but the cub I'd treated lingered for a moment longer. He took a few steps toward me, close enough that I could see the intelligence in his eyes, the vitality that spoke of a life fully lived. Then he turned and bounded after his family, disappearing into the wild with the fluid grace of a creature perfectly adapted to his environment. They were gone, but this time, the goodbye felt different. This wasn't an ending. It was a completion, a circle closed, a story finished with the perfect ending. I stood in my garden for a long time after they'd vanished, filled with a profound sense of satisfaction. I had been chosen for an impossible task, and somehow I had proven worthy of the trust placed in me. Thank you for listening to this story of an impossible request that changed my understanding of trust, compassion, and the connections that can form between the most unlikely companions. I hope it reminded you that sometimes the most meaningful relationships come from the most unexpected places, and that acts of kindness, no matter how small, can create ripples that extend far beyond what we can see. I'd love to hear from you in the comments below. What part of the world are you listening from? Have you ever had an unexpected encounter with wildlife that changed your perspective? Please share your stories, and don't forget to subscribe to the channel for more true stories that celebrate the extraordinary moments hidden in ordinary life. Until next time, remember that sometimes the most impossible requests lead to the most possible miracles.